She thought she could outsmart me with fake citations, fabricated laws, and even the police on speed dial, but when your IQ is 200. And you've got the paperwork to prove you own the only land that controls access to the lake, all their schemes unravel fast. The day Karen showed up in her pressed blazer, clipboard in hand, and that smug smile pasted across her face like she'd already won, I knew she was about to try something slick, but she had no idea she'd just picked the wrong man. Before I tell you how I outmaneuvered an entire HOA board with one email, one hidden clause, and a set of state-level connections they couldn't buy their way past, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment of justice being served cold in the world of HOA Karens. It started in spring, just as the thaw had begun to reveal the natural beauty of the lakeside property I had inherited from my grandfather, place he spent 40 years preserving from the bulldozers, developers, and bureaucrats with boundary issues. After he passed, the entire stretch of wooded shoreline came to me, and while I was never one to make a big deal out of what I owned, word got around quickly in the wrong circles. That's when Karen moved into the new subdivision down the road. One of those cookie-cutter lakefront communities built on the idea of exclusivity, rules, and removing undesirables, which I guess meant anyone who didn't pay HOA dues or paint their deck taupe.
She's elected
Shea president within 3 months and wasted no time sending one of her enforcers. A guy named Brent with an oversized walkie-talkie and too much sunscreen to inspect my land. Lost, which only fueled the fire. 2 days later, I got a citation from the county about illegal structures near the waterline. Structures that had been there since 1982 and were grandfathered in by local code. When I called the county office, they claimed a concerned citizen had filed a complaint, complete with photos, and they were obligated to respond. I knew it was Karen. I replied with scanned deeds, original permits, and a copy of the easement agreement that explicitly stated my family retained full access and control of the shoreline. That should have ended it, didn't. Karen doubled. Down she called in the sheriff's office, claiming I was running an unlicensed campground. Then she had her lake access committee install fake, no trespassing private HOA property. Signs along the trail to the dock, trying to claim my land had somehow been absorbed into their jurisdiction. The kicker, she showed up one Saturday with 2 deputies in tow, smiling like she'd just checkmated me. We've had several reports about noise, suspicious activity, and environmental damage, she said, while the deputies stood awkwardly behind her. I asked the officers if they had a warrant. They didn't. I asked them if Karen had jurisdiction to file claims on private non-HOA land. They looked at each other, confused. That's when I brought out the folder one I kept in my cabin safe. For moments like this, inside was the county land map, annotated by the state surveyor, showing the parcel boundaries and highlighting in bright red the property line that sealed their fate. The HOA community could only access the lake through a narrow public easement a mile away unless they crossed my land. And if my land was close to them, no more lakefront, no more value, no more $1-million listings. I handed the officers a copy. This, I said calmly, is what they don't want you to see. Karen's face drained of color. This must be fake, she stammered. You can't block lake access. It's public property. I pointed to the state ruling from a decade ago, affirming that shoreline property rights in this zone followed the old riparian ownership laws, meaning the landowner controlled up to the high water mark, including all access paths that crossed private ground. She tried to say the HOA had grandfathered access, but she couldn't produce a single document. I had 20. Realized they were being used for a civil power play. They apologized and left. Karen, however, wasn't done. The next week, I received a visit from an independent land appraiser offering me cash for the parcel. I turned him down. Then came the anonymous threats notes left in my mailbox, calls in the middle of the night, even a drone buzzing. My cabin windows escalated to the point that I installed surveillance cameras. What I caught confirmed everything. Karen's. HOA board members were coordinating efforts to make my life miserable until I sold. Their plan? Buy my land cheap, rezone it, and build a private marina for their HOA only. I decided it was time to end this game, but I wasn't going to fight them with lawsuits or loud protests. I was going to use their own bylaws, public record, flaws and real estate dependencies against the men. I had just the strategy to flip the entire HOA structure on its head. I didn't come this far to let a power-hungry suburban dictator like Karen take what wasn't hers, so I dove deep into everything she and her HOA touched. I started by pulling the public filings on their community charter, scanned every amendment and zoning variants they'd used to skirt proper development codes, and found a beautiful little loophole sitting right in the middle of it all. Karen's HOA didn't actually own the retention pond at the entrance of their community. They leased it from the county under a maintenance clause that required full compliance with watershed runoff ordinances. And guess what? My trail cameras and higher-race drone footage showed they had been redirecting drainage pipes directly into the lake through a concealed ditch that ran across my property line. That meant two things. One, they were trespassing and polluting a protected body of water. And two, I now had legal leverage to report them to both the county and the State Department of Natural Resources. But I wasn't finished. Also pulled every real estate listing in the HOA's development and found that nearly all of them mentioned exclusive lake access, a blatant falsehood because no such easement had ever been recorded. They'd been selling homes under a lie. The second I pushed that information into public record, their liability exposure would be catastrophic. The best part? I didn't even have to sue. All I had to do was file a complaint with the state real estate board, attach the maps, and let the brokers and their lawyers scramble to clean up the mess. But before I made my move, I decided to bait Karen into one final act of arrogance. I filed a quiet title action on a strip of shoreline adjacent to my land, one that had been ambiguously surveyed decades ago. It was dormant, legally speaking, but once I claimed it, anyone who trespassed onto it thinking it was public access would now be violating a freshly adjudicated private title. I made sure the county clerk's office notified the HOA. 3 days later, Karen herself marched into the local zoning board meeting, tried to challenge the filing, and embarrassed herself in front of half the town when she couldn't even explain where the HOA's access rights allegedly originated. The board upheld my claim unanimously. Karen was livid. That night, found tire tracks cut through the lower woods and boot prints near my docks. Someone had trespassed again, likely trying to provoke me into an altercation. Instead, I let my surveillance system do the work. The footage caught Brent and another HOA board member with bolt cutters trying to remove one of my posted signs. Sent the video to the sheriff's department, filed a report, and this time the law was firmly on my side. They got cited for trespassing and vandalism. When the story broke in the local newspaper, the entire HOA board started panicking. But Karen, she doubled down once again. She called a community emergency meeting and stood on a makeshift stage in their clubhouse, claiming I was sabotaging their peaceful neighborhood, withholding access to a shared resource, and endangering property values. She said I was a hostile recluse, and even tried to claim that the land I owned had been improperly transferred, clearly an attempt to create doubt among the residents. What she didn't know was that I had someone in that room, my cousin, Lily, who had quietly bought one of the smaller homes in the subdivision just weeks earlier under a different name. She recorded the entire meeting, including when Karen admitted off mic that her goal was to break me financially so the HOA could take control of the lakefront once and for all. I uploaded the footage to a private legal archive and sent a summary to my attorney, with enough evidence now to expose them publicly and legally. I took the next step. I held a press conference on my own land, right on the dock they wanted to steal from me. I invited the county commissioner to state environmental agents, a local journalist, and even a real estate ethics investigator. I laid out maps, cited parcel data, presented historical records, and handed out copies of my permits and rulings. Then I dropped the footage of the HOA board's trespassing, Karen's false statements, and the recorded HOA meeting confession. It was a masterclass in dismantling corruption, and the commissioner's face said it all. "This is more than just a property dispute," he said. "It's a coordinated abuse of process and misrepresentation." Within a week, Karen received a cease and desist from the state board. Brent got arrested for repeated trespassing, and the HOA was fined for environmental violations relating to the runoff pipe. But I wasn't done yet. Sent a formal letter to every homeowner in the HOA neighborhood, detailing the truth about their fraudulent lake access claim and the risk it posed to their property values. I even offered a solution: individual easement contracts, negotiated legally and fairly, for a limited group of homeowners who respected boundaries and wanted true, honest access without the HOA interference. About 20 of them responded positively. They didn't want war, they just wanted the lake. Karen, on the other hand, saw her empire crumbling. And when she realized the homeowners were beginning to side with me, she did something desperate. She filed a bogus lawsuit against me, claiming emotional distress, defamation, and interference with HOA operations. It was ridiculous on its face and was tossed out before it ever reached a hearing. But she used it to fuel one last smear campaign, plastering flyers across town, buying up ads in the community paper, and even calling into local radio shows accusing me of hating the community and being a bully with a trust fund. That's when I decided to hit back with the ultimate checkmate. I filed a formal petition to have the HOA's corporate charter reviewed by the State Attorney General's office under nonprofit fraud guidelines, because the HOA had misrepresented access rights in real estate marketing materials and used dues money to pursue personal vendettas, qualified as grounds for review and potentially dissolution. As the State Attorney General's office began its formal inquiry into the HOA's operations, I made sure every relevant file, time-stamped video, legal permit, and email trail was already prepared, indexed, and delivered with digital backups. I wasn't just playing defense anymore. I was orchestrating a takedown. The HOA's own homeowners started waking up to the reality that Karen's leadership wasn't about community or safety, but about power and control. The cherry on top came from a document I dug out of the county archive, a land grant from over a century ago, which proved that the shoreline rights along the lake had never been subdivided past my grandfather's original claim. That meant my private ownership extended not just along the trail, but across the entire East Bank, where Karen had installed benches, gazebos, and even a community dock hall of it was technically sitting on private property. With that, I filed for removal of all unauthorized structures. And when I served the formal notice through the sheriff's office, panic spread like wildfire through the HOA. Karen tried to call an emergency injunction, but she lacked standing. Court, with a clipboard of blurry photos, vague claims, and no legal authority. Meanwhile, I had 3 attorneys, a property law expert, and a certified land surveyor who walked the judge through every inch of my land rights. The ruling came down swiftly. The structures were illegal. The HOA had violated multiple ordinances, and Karen was instructed to remove all installations at her expense within 30 days or face escalating daily fines. The ruling made the front page of the local paper. I didn't even have to speak. The truth was finally louder than Karen's. Hysteria. That evening, I watched from my porch as a small crew dismantled the gazebo and took down the community dock. But Karen wasn't done fighting. Like a cornered animal, she lashed out. She began targeting the residents who had taken me up on my easement offer, accusing them of betrayal, threatening them with bogus fines, and in one case, attempting to revoke a homeowner's access to the community clubhouse over moral disloyalty. That was a huge mistake. One of those homeowners was Lily, my cousin, who had kept her identity secret until now. She revealed her full connection to me in a community meeting, along with audio recordings of Karen threatening residents and calling them idiots for siding with the lake rat. Karen lost it. She screamed at Lily in front of 24 witnesses, threw a chair, and had to be escorted out by local security. The HOA board finally took notice, under pressure from the real estate liability fallout and internal chaos. They held a vote of no confidence and removed Karen as president. Rather than go quietly, she tried to sue the board, claiming her removal was political persecution. That lawsuit also collapsed within weeks. The state investigation uncovered even more disturbing findings. Karen had misappropriated HOA funds to pay for private investigators, bogus legal filings, and even construction services on her own home, under the guise of community beautification. With these findings, the HOA was hit with more penalties in order to undergo a full reorganization. Many members resigned. I knew Karen was on the verge of snapping, and I wasn't wrong. In a final act of spite, she tried to break into my cabin while I was out visiting Lily. My alarm system triggered the moment she stepped onto my porch. She was caught red-handed on camera attempting to force the door open with a crowbar. The sheriff's deputies who responded to the call already knew the backstory. And Karen was arrested on the spot for attempted burglary and trespassing. The charges stuck. She was forced into a plea deal, fined, and given a restraining order that barred her from coming within 300 feet of my property. But the damage she'd done to her reputation was already complete. She lost her position, her legal credibility, and her grip on the community. The residents were now scrambling to save what little integrity remained in their development. Meanwhile, I continued making good on my promise. I finalized legal easement contracts with those who wanted honest access. And in exchange, they agreed to respect the land, pay a fair maintenance fee, and keep the HOA out of it. For the first time, I walked down my trail without seeing signs of intrusion or hearing whispers of manipulation. The lake was calm, the air clear, and the HOAs. Power had been dismantled, not through violence or revenge, but through intelligence, patience, and law. I didn't just defend my land, I restored it. But something still didn't sit right with me. There was one thing Karen had said, back during one of her rants, that echoed in my head. There's more of us coming. This lake won't stay private for long. That warning felt more like a plan than an empty threat. I began to suspect Karen hadn't been acting entirely on her own. There were signs of mails sent to developers, meetings at the county level that weren't logged publicly, and rumors of a larger project proposal for a massive marina and resort development on the opposite side of the lake. If those rumors were true, the war wasn't over. Karen had just been the first wave. And now that she was gone, someone else might be preparing to finish what she started. But this time, I'd be ready. After Karen's fall from power, I expected a period of peace. A long-awaited return to the calm that the lake had always promised. But what I got instead was a brief lull before the next storm. A week after Karen's sentencing, I received a certified letter addressed not from the HOA, but from a private investment firm based 2 counties over, offering me an absurdly generous purchase price for my lakeside property. They framed it as a once-in-a-generation development opportunity that would unify the regions. Waterfront potential. I read the letter 3 times before setting it down and walking out onto the dock, where the water lapped quietly. Beneath my feet, unaware of the greed it inspired in people who couldn't see it for anything but profit, the name on the letterhead was Vincent Drake, a man known in real estate circles as the king of quiet takeovers. He bought out fractured communities, pushed through rezoning with slick lobbying, and buried resistance in red tape and strategic legal fatigue. I knew immediately that Karen had been just one piece of something larger. She wasn't trying to own the land for the sake of an HOA victory. She was trying to flip it to a higher bidder, probably with promises of a share in the profits. And now that she was out of the picture, her backers had stepped out of the shadows. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I launched my own investigation into Drake's firm. Within days, I uncovered land acquisitions quietly made along the northern ridge of the lake, tied to shell companies that led back to his development network. He was assembling parcels like chess pieces, but my property cut straight through. The heart of his plan, without it, his access was bottlenecked, and the environmental impact review would crush any permits he tried to obtain. That made me a problem. A big one. Just as I predicted, the pressure started creeping in fast. The county zoning board suddenly had questions about my trail usage, even though nothing had changed. The local environmental agency asked for a site visit to inspect shoreline erosion, even though I'd passed every test 2 months earlier. Then came anonymous complaints to the IRS, suggesting I'd misreported land use income, a desperate fishing expedition if there ever was one. I knew. It wasn't personal. It was tactical. They were trying to rattle me, drain my energy, and find a crack they could exploit. But I'd been preparing for this. I had every file archived, every document verified, and multiple attorneys already on standby, including one who specialized in land trust protections and had experience going up against developers like Drake. Together, we began the process of transferring my land into a private conservation trust, which would not only protect it from forced sale, but also give it certain tax and legal immunities. It wasn't just a defense, it was a full-scale fortress. While that paperwork moved forward, I made my own countermove. I contacted a regional environmental watchdog group with strong political clout and showed them everything Corinne's earlier schemes, Drake's linked acquisitions, the rezoning risk, and the probable intent to destroy the natural ecology with commercial overdevelopment. They were immediately interested. A week later, their investigative unit filed a request with the state's Environmental Oversight Board to review all land sales and planned projects near the lake. That request triggered a 120-day hold on all new permits within a 5-mile radius of my property, including any held by companies affiliated with Drake's firm. It was a surgical strike, and the timing was perfect as that hammer came down. I received a second letter from Drake, himself less polite than the first, more threatening. He accused me of standing in the way of progress, harming the local economy, and warned that my actions would not be without consequences. That's when I decided to go public again. I invited the same journalist who had covered Karen's collapse to my cabin, laid out the full timeline, the new development threat, the conservation trust plan, and Drake's attempt to a private landowner into submission. The article dropped within 48 hours. The headline read, "Developer's Dream Blocked by Lakeside Genius." The local and state buzz exploded. Comments flooded in, people siding with me, community activists warning about environmental degradation, and even city council members pledging to oppose any overreach. And just when I thought things were peaking, a state senator reached out. She'd read the article and wanted to help champion a bill that would protect independently held lakefront properties from eminent domain abuse. I agreed, and within weeks, I was testifying via remote session to a legislative committee about the importance of property rights, environmental stewardship, and standing up to corporate pressure. Drake, cornered and exposed, couldn't afford the PR nightmare. But instead of backing down, he made one final, ruthless move. He filed a lawsuit claiming I had defamed his firm, interfered with lawful business operations, and violated a non-existent agreement Karen had supposedly initiated. It was laughable, but his goal wasn't to win, it was to bury me in court costs. What he didn't expect was that my legal team had already filed a preemptive anti-slap motion. And by the time the judge reviewed the documents, Drake's case collapsed like a wet paper bag. The judge not only threw it out, but ordered Drake's firm to pay my legal fees and issued a statement, condemning the use of courts to silence legitimate property owners. With that, the threat was neutralized. Drake lost more than just the land, he lost his chance to buy silence. And in the wake of his defeat, I solidified the Conservation Trust, opening it to local schools and science groups for seasonal study programs. The lake remained untouched, peaceful, and protected. And though the fight had been long, every inch of it proved one truth: when you have the facts, the law, and a sharp enough mind, even the richest bullies can't steal what's rightfully yours. Months passed, and the lake returned to its natural rhythm: quiet mornings with mist hanging low over the water, eagles diving for fish, kids from the local school exploring the shoreline during science field trips. And for the first time in years, no HOA bullies patrolling the trail or snooping around with clipboards and smug grins. With the Conservation Trust finalized and legally ironclad, the land was now permanently protected, its legacy secured beyond even my own lifetime. But while the lake had found its balance, the ripples of everything that had happened still echoed across the community. The HOA, now under entirely new leadership, was barely holding together. Homeowners were divided, some grateful for what I'd done, others angry that the lie they had been sold had crumbled before their eyes. Property values dipped slightly, but stabilized once people realized the lake access issue had been resolved. The right way, through real legal channels, not backroom deals and corrupt schemes. Karen disappeared completely from public view, her name now associated with a cautionary tale of what happens when someone abuses power and underestimates the people around them. Her criminal record followed her, and last I heard, she'd moved out of state under her maiden name, trying to rebuild her life somewhere far from lakes, HOAs, and the neighbors she once tried to dominate. Vincent Drake, after his failed lawsuit and very public disgrace, had to sell off portions of his development portfolio to cover fines and legal costs. His investors abandoned him when it became clear he'd built his empire on intimidation, fraud, and fragile legal tricks that couldn't survive scrutiny. His planned marina, dead in the water. The land he had assembled, some of it reverted to public control, and parts of it were bought up by a regional conservancy who aligned with my efforts to protect the area from further damage. That meant not only was my land safe, but the entire eastern half of the lake was now surrounded by protected forest, walking trails, and education centers. It was bigger than me now. It was a movement. I spent more time outdoors after that fishing, repairing the old dock, even helping local students with environmental projects, and I found that peace was sweeter when you knew what it had cost to earn it. Occasionally I'd still get emails from opportunists offering to buy my property, always with big numbers and vague promises. I never replied. They didn't understand what the land meant, what it represented. It wasn't about money. It was about legacy, principle, and refusing to be steamrolled by people who think intelligence is just a party trick and not a weapon. Every inch of my fight had been calculated, deliberate, and backed by truth. It wasn't just Karen's downfall or Drake's defeat that made the victory satisfying. It was proving that in a world full of pressure and deception, calm, informed resistance could still win. And for every person out there dealing with their own version of an HOA tyrant or corporate bully, I say this: know your rights, prepare your case, and never underestimate the power of a smart mind and a patient heart. That's how you win. That's how you outlast them. And if you liked this story and want to hear more real-life battles where justice crushes corruption, don't forget to subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel, where we expose every HOA Karen, every crooked cop, and every rich manipulator who thinks they can play with other people's lives. The war might be over at my lake, but there are plenty more fights worth watching, and you won't want to miss a single one. Even though the big battles had been won and the lake was now under legal protection, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still loose threads in the whole mess details that didn't fully add up. Whispers I hadn't yet traced to their source. While Karen was gone and Drake's reputation had tanked, I started digging through the digital remnants of everything they had touched, especially the records Karen had tried to scrub from public view. One document, buried in an old county meeting transcript, stood out. It mentioned a proposed corridor initiative filed by a real estate consulting firm with no obvious name, just a set of initials, TLR Holdings. The corridor plan outlined a blueprint to connect 3 lakeside parcels, including mine, into a future development zone marked for mixed-use waterfront commerce. The document was flagged as inactive, but the timing lined up with Karen's first fake citations against my dock and shoreline, which meant it wasn't a coincidence. It was a blueprint for annexation, and my land had always been the centerpiece. TLR Holdings turned out to be a ghost company, one of those paper shell corporations designed to leave no trail. But through some careful digital sleuthing and property metadata cross-referencing, I traced their filings to a P.O. box in a small city north of mine, and from there to a tech entrepreneur or land speculator named Owen Lasker. He wasn't just rich, he was dangerous in a way different from Drake. While Drake relied on pressure and influence, Owen used networks, money laundering pipelines, and data manipulation. A search on Owen brought up news stories from 3 different states involving real estate revolts, all in rural areas where waterfront property had quietly changed hands. Infrastructure popped up overnight, and local governments seemed oddly cooperative with rezoning requests. That was the moment I realized Karen and Drake weren't the masterminds. They were middlemen. The real threat had yet to arrive. Owen Lasker had eyes on my lake long before any HOA was even formed, and Karen was just the pawn who traded, failed to destabilize me enough to make a purchase possible. Now that his frontmen were gone, he'd either cut his losses or come at me directly. I prepared for the latter. I built a digital fortress around every record. I had cloud backups, encrypted drives, off-site storage, and legal offices I trusted. I filed additional protections around the Conservation Trust, elevating its status to include ecological restoration zones, which added another layer of state-level scrutiny to any attempt to alter the land. But what I didn't expect was for Owen to try a completely different tactic: charm. He didn't send a lawyer, a developer, or a crooked HOA rep this time. He sent a woman named Amber, who showed up at my dock one warm afternoon holding a picnic basket and a casual smile. She claimed to be a nature photographer who had heard of my conservation efforts and wanted to discuss a partnership. She complimented my dock work, talked about her love for dragonflies and clean water, and even named a few bird species correctly. She was good, really good, but not good enough. Her shoes were wrong. Expensive Italian leather boots, pristine, too clean to have walked through a forest trail. Her camera gear was high-end, but had no memory card inserted. And when I asked her about the environmental review process for shoreline conservation permits, she blanked. She had no idea what I was talking about. I played along, kept the conversation friendly, told her I'd be happy to consider her proposal if she emailed me the details. She smiled, thanked me, and left. I followed her discreetly at a distance, through the woods on the old game. Trayland watched her get into a black SUV with tinted windows and government plates. He knew right then this was bigger than local land deals. They were testing me again, seeing if I'd flinch. I didn't. I went straight home, documented everything: license plate, timestamp, facial recognition capture from my trail cam, and compiled a new report. This time, I sent it not just to my attorney, but to a contact I'd made during the legislative committee hearing months earlier, a federal land fraud investigator. Within days, he responded. He had heard of Owen Lasker and confirmed that multiple investigations were quietly underway in neighboring states, encouraged me to keep documenting everything, and said I might become a key witness if the investigations moved forward. That was the first time I realized my little lake story had turned into a multi-state conspiracy case. I reinforced the cabin security, added motion sensors, infrared surveillance, and began recording every interaction with strangers near the property line. One night, around 2 a.m., I spotted two men walking the boundary trail wearing dark clothes. No lights, just creeping slowly along the fence line. I called it in, and the local sheriff's deputies responded fast, but the men were gone by the time they arrived. We reviewed the footage, and sure enough, both men had military-grade night vision gear. That wasn't petty trespassing. That was reconnaissance. I uploaded the footage and sent it to the federal contact. He responded in under 2 hours. Do not engage. We're escalating this. It was surreal. My fight had started with a clipboard, Karen, and some fake citations, and now it had escalated to federal surveillance and criminal land laundering networks. But through it all, I never lost control, because I never let rage guide me. I stayed focused, informed, and always 5 steps ahead. I held a press event the following weekend, inviting every local journalist I could find. I didn't mention Owen Lasker by name, but I told the truth, that external actors had been targeting the lake for development under the guise of local disputes. I detailed my experience, shared surveillance images, and called for greater legal protections for rural landowners facing organized pressure. The story exploded again. Soon I was contacted by landowners across the state with similar experiences, strange offers, fake lawsuits, anonymous complaints, and mysterious visitors like Amber. I started compiling their stories, helping them connect the dots. And we began forming a regional alliance, informal but growing network of people who refused to be manipulated, bullied, or bought out. It was a quiet revolution, one property at a time. And while the lake remained the heart of my story, the real victory was that we were creating a movement far beyond the shoreline. A community of resistance rooted in truth, legal clarity, and courage. I didn't need a title, a badge, or a fancy degree to defend what was mine. I just needed patience, intellect, and a deep understanding that some things are worth fighting for. No matter how powerful your enemies think they are, the lake was still mine. The truth was still mine. And as long as I drew breath, No HOA, developer, or secretive billionaire was going to take it away. As summer crept in and the trees bloomed full around the lake, I found myself walking the same trails my grandfather once carved with his bare hands, every step echoing not just the legacy he left behind, but the war I had fought to protect it. The threats had quieted down, for now no more fake appraisers, no more drone flyovers, no more HOA thugs with pocket clipboards and radio earpieces, acting like their $300 dues made them gods of the shoreline. The Conservation Trust had been legally armored with multi-layer clauses, state-endorsed protections, and federal oversight now thanks to my work with the Land Fraud Task Force, which had officially launched investigations into over a dozen similar cases in surrounding counties, all tied back to Owen Lasker and his web of shell companies. His name had finally appeared in the news, not because I had outed him, but because the FBI had issued sealed indictments based on the testimonies and evidence people like me had gathered. That woman Amber, she was later identified as a corporate liaison involved in at least 3 fraudulent acquisitions using falsified surveys and bribed zoning officials. She vanished from the scene entirely once subpoenas started flying. As for Karen, word came around that she'd filed for bankruptcy. After civil penalties and personal lawsuits from her own former HOA members caught up with her, her role in trying to trick homeowners, misappropriate funds, and intimidate neighbors had become local legend. She was the poster child of how HOA power could be corrupted and crushed under the weight of truth. How the HOA itself had restructured into a voluntary community group with limited power, no authority over private properties, and a new president who, funny enough, reached out to thank me for not giving up. He admitted many homeowners had no idea what Karen had been doing in their name, and that my resistance gave them a second chance. I wasn't looking for thanks, but I accepted the olive branch. Not because I forgave what happened, but because the war had taught me something deeper. That victory doesn't come from destruction, it comes from transformation. I turned a hostile neighborhood into a legally respectful one. I turned my land into a fortress, not by building walls, but by building knowledge, documentation, and alliances. And I turned myself from a quiet landowner into a guardian of something much larger than my own property. That's the thing about intelligence. It's not about flexing facts or memorizing law books. It's about seeing 10 moves ahead, staying grounded, and never letting panic lead the charge. They came at me with threats, lies, and lawsuits. I responded with evidence, planning, and calm determination. They thought they could wear me down, but instead, I built something permanent, a story too powerful to be buried. Now that story is out there. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like someone was using power to crush you, whether it's an HOA with fake rules, a developer with deep pockets, or a neighbor with too much time and no morals, let this be your proof that standing your ground,
Art.
armed with truth and patience, works. I didn't need millions. I didn't need politics. I didn't even need help at first. I just needed to be smarter, faster, and more prepared. So if you're ready to hear more stories like this, real stories of people who fight back against corrupt systems, who don't roll over when they're threatened, and who use their minds like weapons, make sure you subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel right now, because every day another HOA Karen is being exposed. Another liar is caught in the act. Another land grab fails. You don't want to miss how the next one goes down. Hit that subscribe button, share this story, and stay ready. Because somewhere out there, another Karen is plotting in someone smart, just like you, is already 3 steps ahead.